Hey, well, welcome to House Church, and I'm so glad that you're with us. We've got a couple of brand new house churches. Welcome. And we've got a lot of folks that are new to House Church. And so we're so glad you're with us. Listen, every week we're going to eat together, we're going to study scripture together, encourage each other, and pray together. And so that's all you have to be nervous about. Sit back, relax. And each week we're going to give you a little 9-minute summary of the message. And each message comes from our Bible reading plan. And the story that I'm teaching on today is the story you're going to read in the Bible reading plan tomorrow. And it's a story many of you have heard. It's where Jesus comes on the scene and he heals Lazarus. Now, it's a kind of a long passage. I'm not going to be able to read it all and make it in our summary today. And so I'm going to summarize it for you and you'll read it tomorrow. First thing that happens is Mary and Martha realize that their brother Lazarus is dying. And so they do what many of us would do in that moment, and they send for help. They send a messenger to tell Jesus. Now, if you've read the story, the first part of the story that shocks you is Jesus gets word that his buddy Lazarus is dying, and he stays where he is. I mean, it's a mystery. Why does Jesus do that? And I want to take a few points, a few things in this passage, and lead them to some ways that you and I can come alive this year spiritually. And the first one is this. I want you to reset your expectations. Listen, part of our expectations, and I don't know where this came about, but as believers, we thought maybe because we know, love, and follow Jesus, that we're not going to go through difficult times. Listen, that's just not true. I mean, we live in a fallen and a broken world, and if you need to blame somebody, don't blame you. Blame Adam and Eve. They're the ones that made the decision, and when they made that decision to separate from God, sin entered the world, and when that happens, sometimes the things we walk through are because of decisions we make. Sometimes it's because we live in a broken world. And if you're going to come alive, and I want you to come alive this year in your faith, in your spiritual life, the first thing is to begin to know and be prepared. It's going to be difficult. You're going to walk through some difficult things, and sometimes it's just because we're in a broken world. And I think Mary and Martha had to take a deep breath. They had to realize, listen, what I'm going to do now as I'm walking through this tough time with my brother is I'm going to run to Jesus and not from Jesus. And so when those difficult times hit this year and you begin to come alive in your faith, the first thing we've got to do is have our expectations in line, but run to Jesus when the difficult times. Don't run away from him. The next thing that I see in this story is for our faith to come alive, there's a moment where we've got to step back into it. We've got to reset our faith itself. I love the story because Jesus gets the word, he stays where he is. And then after a moment, he says to his disciples, we've got to go see what's going on. I'm about to go do a major work in Lazarus' life. And the one that says, let's go is Thomas. Thomas looks at the disciples, he looks at Jesus, and he says, I don't want to miss this, let's go. This is going to be a year you're going to have a chance to step into some things with your faith that maybe you've stepped away from in the past. Maybe for some of you, it was stepping back into house church. Way to go, man. That's the first step for you. Good job. Some of you, it's stepping into a Bible reading plan that maybe you've gotten out of the habit of reading the Word. I understand that. Maybe this is the year that you say, hey, I'm going to step into that. Maybe it's a difficult marriage, a difficult relationship, whatever it might be that you've backed away from and you've lost faith. I think, man, one of the examples we see in this is to say, let this be the year that you reset your faith. To say, God, I want to see you do a major work. One of the lines I say was this, maybe the place you feel like Jesus is failing is actually the place where Jesus is working. I love that. Maybe one of the areas in your life that you're going, I don't see Jesus at work here. I don't understand what's happening here. For Mary and Martha, that was the fact that their brother was dying. And they were asking questions, why? Why is this happening? And you're asking the same thing. Why is this area so difficult? Well, one of the reasons this was so difficult was because by Jesus waiting, he got to step in and do a miracle in Lazarus' life. And when he did that, Peter was on the scene, one of the disciples, and he saw what happened. And because he saw the faith that Jesus had to ask God to do a miracle in Lazarus' life, he was prepared later on in his life in the book of Acts, Acts 9, to do the same miracle in Tabitha's life. And without the example of Jesus, Peter wouldn't have had the faith to do what he did. What I'm saying is this, the pain that you're going through will end up being a platform for you and for people to follow you in the way that you have faith in what's difficult. Whatever you're facing, I'm going to challenge you to step out in faith and let this be the year that your faith is bold. And I'm not good at that, y'all. That's something that challenges me. I want to have more faith this year. Third thing, for your faith to come alive, for your spiritual life to come alive, you got to reset your timeline. And I love this because when Jesus finally comes on the scene and he makes the journey from where he is, or from where he was to where he's going to find Lazarus, the first one to come running out to see him is one of the sisters, and it's Martha. And I say Martha is like a present day Karen. I mean, she is in his face like, hey, I'm the boss here. You should have come earlier. If you'd have been here, Lazarus wouldn't have died. And then she gives all these kind of Sunday school answers. And Jesus all the time is looking at Martha going, wait a minute, I'm ready to do a work. I'm ready to do it. And Martha says, I know one day he's going to be in heaven. And then Jesus kind of turns the conversation and says, not one day, right now. And I wonder about our timeline because so often as believers, we talk about when we first accepted Christ, when we were baptized, when we walked down the aisle, when we first went to church, how your grandparents were a preacher or a part of a church, whatever. We talk about one day we're going to be in heaven and it's going to be great in streets of gold. But can I tell you, Jesus says, I'm ready to do a work in Lazarus' life today. And I want to encourage you in that. The time frame that Jesus has in mind for you to come alive in your faith is this January, this night, this moment, 2021. He has you in the place that you are for a purpose. And I don't want you to miss it because you're reflecting backwards or because you're looking forward. Instead, let this be the timeline that is reset to say, I'm going to come alive in my faith now. Finally, the most powerful part of the chapter is when Jesus finally arrives and he prays to God and he says, God, I'm asking that you do a miracle. And then he says in a loud voice, he says, Lazarus, come out. And I love that he was so specific. I mean, that's just funny, right? I mean, who else was going to come out? Well, thank goodness he said Lazarus. So Lazarus, you come out. And then when Lazarus comes out, he gives him one final instruction. He says, would you take off the grave clothes and would you let that go? And the last thing I'm going to ask you to do for your faith to come alive this year, for 2021 to look different for you, you're going to have to reset from your past. I don't know your past, but I know you have one. Lazarus had one. Mary and Martha had one. Listen, their past was watching their brother die. And their conversation, their focus had all been about how Jesus was late, how Jesus ghosted them, how they went through a hard time, and how their brother died. Everything about that story changed when Lazarus came out. What do you think they're talking about now? They're talking about how their brother is alive. And I want you to change the conversation. Let's not talk about your past anymore. I know it was difficult. I know there's scars. They're always going to remember when their brother passed. But the thing they're going to focus on and talk about now is that they have their brother and life is new and it's different. God's calling you into a new life this year where you come alive in your faith, and the last thing he tells you to do is the same thing he told Lazarus to do. He said, take off the grave clothes. Now, keep your clothes on, but figuratively, let this be a year that you take off some of the things that have had you hindered, that have had you withholding who you really are. Let this be the year that you take off the bad relationship, the thing that has, caused so much pain that you can't get over. Take off some of those things and begin to take on God's grace and his love and his new plan for you. I love the imagery. The New Testament is full of imagery about life. When you see people baptized at Venture, you'll see a lot of them this year. We'll say you're buried with Christ and raised to walk in new life in this moment. This year, would you come alive spiritually like you never have before? So glad you're in House Church. You guys talk about this and know we love you and we're praying for you.